Hey, here we are. Finally, we're a little bit late. I do apologize about that. We were having some techie issues. But we are here today to talk about the Renters' Rights Bill. Now, we've had a lot to think about over the last few weeks, from the budget, which is not the topic of this conversation. The Renters' Rights Bill has been trundling on for a little while now. I know if you're a letting agent, unless you've been hiding under a very large rock somewhere, you will have heard about it and you've probably been having discussions about it. And almost everywhere we go now, everyone is discussing the Renters' Rights Bill and what that means. Landlords are trembling with fear about it. Tenants seem quite happy about it. And from letting agents' point of view, we've got a lot of changes, a lot of things to think about in relation to the Renters' Rights Bill, because it really is going to change a lot of the way we do things. And so what does it mean for us, and what do we need to change, and how do we need to evolve to make our businesses ready for the Renters' Rights Bill? And when is that going to be? And what do we start to think about now, and what do we need to do? So I thought, who are the best two people I know that can come in and talk to me and talk to us and talk to you about the Renters' Rights Bill and help us prepare for that? And there's no better than Dawn Bennett and Sophie Lang. So before I pass over to them and ask some questions, let me just give you a little bit of an introduction. Sophie Lang is partnership with Rhiannon Llewellyn, and they run Lang Llewellyn in Cornwall, which is now one of the largest agents in Cornwall, if not the largest agents in Cornwall, which is absolutely phenomenal. An amazing company, which means when it comes to these sort of things, they've got a lot of work to do in their business. And I know that they've been thinking a lot about that and making a lot of changes in preparation for that. So we have a real hardcore practitioner on our stage here. She's also a representative for ARLA, which is fantastic. So she's really talking about this on a regular basis with ARLA. And she's also one of our Agent Rainmaker community members as well. So she has a real all 360 round view of how you can optimize and squeeze, but also how to be safe and legislatively compliant all around the Renters' Rights Bill. Now, Dawn Bennett, many would say she needs no introduction, but Dawn Bennett is our legal beagle. She's actually my operations and compliance manager here. She manages all of our properties that we manage for people all over the country, and she watches almost every single legal webinar that comes out. I don't know how she does it, and runs our legal training days as well as running a property management team that literally manages thousands of properties. So we have two really highly qualified to speak on this topic people here on this webinar today. And I have a list of about 12, 13 questions that I'm going to take these ladies through around a Renters' Rights Bill. But if you have any questions, then please let us know. Drop in the chat. I have a team of people looking across social media. They will let me know if there's any burning questions that you want me to ask. So I'm going to start off with Sophie Lang first. Balancing rights. Just have a think about this. How does this bill balance the right? Because the intention of it is to improve the rights of tenants and to balance the equation between landlords and tenants. I just want to ask you an overview opinion here, Sophie. Do you think it does that? Does it actually balance the rights? Is it going to make things better for both parties?
Well, I think if we look at the fact they renamed it from Renters Reform to Renters' Rights, should give you a bit of a hint about the way that it's going. But I think that there was good intentions with a lot of it. I think that there was need for some change in some areas. I don't disagree with reform. I just think that some of the areas haven't been thought out well enough. And I do think it's going to bring imbalance. And I do think it's going to negatively hit tenants, who are the people that the government were trying to protect and help.
That sounds a little bit like the tenant fee ban, which was there to protect tenants and save them from the £200 plus charges they were going to have moving into a property, which has resulted in rents rising across the country by horrendous percentages. So that's really interesting that you say that. Quite interesting. Dawn, any further comments on that? Do you think it's going to balance the scales here?
I agree very much with Sophie on this one. I think if you look at it from when it was the Renters Reform Bill, and I used to communicate with landlords and other agents, if you look at it how it was initially, as it was meant to look like, it actually would have helped landlords as much as it would have helped tenants. Because landlords have some difficulties in the way that the legislation lies at the moment. And one of the examples I'll use there is that if you have a difficult tenant through antisocial behaviour, the only way you can exit that tenant quickly is through using an antisocial behaviour ground, which is a discretionary ground. So landlords tend to not use that. So the way that I actually looked at it when it was in its renters reform language was that actually what it's just trying to do is make both sides easier. So landlords could get rid of bad tenants quicker and easier, and good tenants could get out of bad landlords contracts quicker and easier. But as Sophie's just suggested, it's now called the Renters' Rights Bill. And whilst the headlines of what they want to do hasn't really changed very much, has it, in terms of what their headline looks like? But the practicality beneath it has changed a little bit more than we were expecting. So the balance is now starting to look a little bit different. But again, I agree. I think one of the challenges here is that it's meant to help tenants, but I think that in certain areas it's actually going to increase rents again potentially, and therefore make market conditions harder.
It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of it is about perception, I believe. Like how are these things perceived? The tenant fee ban was like, yeah, we won from the tenant's perspective, and now we have a shortage of property, rocketing rent. It's very difficult for tenants to get homes, and that's something that was being celebrated at the time, even though we all said this is not good, this is not going to help, it's just going to cause a problem. And I think there's a lot of perception around this addition, the Renters' Rights Bill, from both landlords and tenants, again, of positive and negative. And I wonder if there's a lot of smokescreen there. Just to make sure we all understand what we're talking about, Dawn, could you give us an overview of the key impacts, the key things around the Renters' Rights Bill that people need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think the most talked about factor, let's be clear, is probably the abolition of Section 21. And it's the one thing that most landlords fear. Interestingly, I think as letting agents and as people that look into and understand the legislation, I actually fear that the least. I don't feel that that's going to have much of an impact on the way that we operate, because percentage-wise, the highest percentage of Section 21s that are used currently, I'm sure it's a 90% plus percentage, that when landlords are evicting their tenants using Section 21, it's for three key reasons. Either rent arrears, they want to sell, or the tenant's not a good tenant and they just want to get rid of them and move them on. Well, under the new legislation, we're still going to be able to do all three of those things. So I feel that that's probably the least things for landlords to be concerned about. I think there's a lot of changes that are all happening at once. And I've said this already, that this is going to be the biggest change to our industry since 1989. But in 1989, we were celebrating the welcoming of the Housing Act, where we were taking it from a protected tenancy scenario and changing the private rented sector into a whole new world of for everything that had happened at that period of time was for the good. What's happening here now is there's such a big, massive change happening again. So a few things just to note: landlords will have to be registered with a property ombudsman, a private ombudsman scheme. That's something landlords have never had to do. They're also going to have to be registered on database, their property and their name as a landlord. We've got rules surrounding rent increases that on first glance, and this is why I say the headline, you think, oh, well, we have to do that anyway. But then you read below the line and you start to see different intentions in the way that this is being brought forward. You've got decent home standards, which I think every single letting agent supports. Decent homes standards being brought into the private rented sector. It's something that's needed. But there's just so much all being levied at once, and the fact that it's all going to be retrospective, so it's going to mean every single tenancy, no matter where, once we start, that's it, we're in. There's just so many changes. We've got discrimination changes, but again, I always say, well, discrimination is illegal now. What's different? It's illegal now, it's still going to be illegal then. So there's just a lot, isn't there, Sophie, coming through all at once. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest fears for landlords. But I think that from a landlord's point of view, it's the abolition of Section 21. But I think it's the least thing to be worried about.
What about you, Sophie? What do you think landlords are most fearful of from your conversations?
I agree. It does seem to be Section 21. And there's a misunderstanding about Section 21 and leave that being gone is the only way to evict tenants. And once you calm a landlord down, I'm saying you're still going to have these options. I mean, the strengthening of Section 8, yes, okay, there are things in Section 8, but there's a lot of grey area in the new Section 8s. Students is a particularly grey area where it'll now only cover HMO, which is 3 or more sharers. So if you've got a student with 2 people, or even one student that lives in a flat on their own, you won't be able to use that ground. So there won't be a ground to evict them, which will impact that end of the market. Landlords I'm speaking to, I mean, rent increases, Section 13 again isn't an over concern. We only do it once a year generally anyway, but the use of Section 13 is I think landlords are concerned that that's a kind of form of rent cap, which you know it isn't, but it's trying to explain that to them, and there's a lot of media scaremongering. I think my concern is that, I think you touched on it, was tenant fee ban, the unintended causes. We're seeing it again, and we only have to look to Scotland to see how they've been through this and how it's affected their market in a negative way. And we seem to be making the same mistakes over and over again. I think landlords, I mean, obviously there's pets. I mean, what annoys me, I know Dawn's already mentioned it, is that a lot of this is already in existence in some form or another. They're just compiling it into one act. So we've already got the Health and Fitness Human Habitation Act, which is basically decent home standards. We've already got these things, and they're not being currently policed properly because councils don't have the funds to do so. So I'm not unsure how a lot of it's going to be policed.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Scotland, actually, because I know in Scotland, because what a lot of people are seeing is the headline, Section 21's going. What they're not seeing is that there's new grounds that are going to be put in play so that you can use a Section 8. Just to clarify, because landlords probably don't understand the language of a Section 8. So you've got 2 ways. If you want to get your property back, there's Section 21, which is the no-fault ground, as in you just want your property back, you can serve Section 21. And then you've got section using Section 8, which is where you can use any of the other grounds. Now, at the moment, there isn't sufficient grounds if you just want your property back, but the discussion is there will be alternative grounds if you need your property back. And I know in Scotland, I think it was 2018, when the Private Tenancies Act came out, was that there was 3 additional grounds added, which was you want to sell the property, you need to renovate the property, you want to move back into the property, you can still serve a notice to gain your property back. And I believe the discussion is that they're going to be looking at putting something like that in here, which you guys are practitioners more so than I am. In generally, if a Section 21 is used, that's the reason why. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I'm yet to evict a tenant for no reason, Dawn. I'm sure you haven't either.
Absolutely not.
They think we do. They think we just randomly evict people for no reason. I mean, that's where we make our money, where landlords make their money. Why would you just evict people? It's just crazy. They think that's what we do.
It's interesting because when you actually look at the new grounds, and I may be being a bit pedantic, but we're currently operating at probably, we know that there's 17 grounds, but all of them have sub-grounds like 17ZA and so forth. I actually counted the grounds proposed on the new Section 8, and I got to a number of 36. 30, so there's not just a few, Sally, being added. 36 if you read them line by line, as in 5.
It was hard enough memorising 17. I couldn't memorise 36.
But there's been some really good additions, suggestions. Would you agree with me there, Sophie? Where we're finally getting an antisocial behaviour ground that's mandatory. That's a positive. I know we don't quite know the detail of that yet, but we've seen an indication of it. But that is definitely a positive. They're making the grounds more relevant to where we are now in 2024, not in 1989. You know, so there's many positives that with the Section 8, there will be additional grounds added. But I think from a letting agent point of view now, what my concern is all evictions now, should a tenant not vacate, have to pass through courts. We already know the situation with the courts currently. Removing the fact that Section 21 court possession is normally done through the post unless defended. The concerns of both probably landlords and letting agents is that court times are going to only get worse, and can they cope?
Are they still talking about having a specific court for evictions? That's gone now.
Yeah, they said we were not waiting for reform, didn't they? Yes, they were like, nope.
I think Conservatives, by the end of they're kind of going through this process, realised some of the limitations, and one of those was the court issue. I think our court currently is 11-month waiting list, and that's on a Section 21, which is, pretty mostly postal, like Dawn says, and not court. It's not as many resources. If we go to Section 8, then the courts are going to be absolutely backlogged. So we are looking at a long wait, and the Conservatives said they would not remove Section 21 until they looked at the court system. Labour are very gung-ho, and I understand they want to look like they're making action and doing their plan within their so many days in office. But we've seen it with the budget. They've made them appear like that instantly overnight, and they've not thought about actually this is an industry that needs planning, and it involves a lot of background planning, and a lot of it depends on things working smoothly. So, and at the moment they're saying with this act that when it comes in for every tenancy immediately on date of dot, which is just going to make the system, especially the eviction system, just collapse on itself.
Surely we'd be waiting like 3-4 years for a court eviction, wouldn't we, on that scenario?
Yeah,
that would be crazy.
Potentially.
I agree. And I think that that's the problem, that when you look at the headline, and this is what I said right at the beginning, if you look at the headline, it's actually not that scary. But when you look at the practicalities beneath what the intentions are, it then in the real world, let's just call it that, because we are practicing letting agents. There are landlords out there that are experiencing the lengthy court waits. We're like, this doesn't make sense. A landlord cannot wait 2 to 3 years for possession of his property. If you think about things logically, if that was a non-paying tenant, this is going to encourage behaviour that we're trying to avoid. This is going to encourage
repossessions as well, because landlords will be getting repossessed because they can't afford their mortgages.
Well, good luck, because guess what? The repossession clause is on Section 8, and they'd have to wait just as long as us to get to court. So
I mean, I'm worried about I don't know about you, Dawn, but with like arrears and things, I understand, like you said, the headline is, okay, so now for arrears, obviously at the moment we can use Section 8 if they go into 2 months arrears. They're going to extend that to 3 before you can even start eviction proceedings on them. Now, my concern is that as a headline sounds like, oh, you're protecting the tenant for more time. But actually what that's going to do is put tenants in a much worse financial position. It's going to stretch out, it's kicking a can down the road. I think Rhiannon said it to me earlier. It's going to get people in more debt faster. It's going to cause mental health issues. I feel that they're not looking at the impact that has on the tenant. They've only looked at it from the protecting the tenant side, but actually letting a tenant go that long in arrears is actually only more detrimental to the tenant as well as the landlord. It's not really helping either party out.
I agree. And they've also not only increased the timescale from 2 months to 3 months, they've also doubled the notice period that we need to provide when serving the Section 8 from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So effectively, as we sit here today, a tenant can be 2 months and 2 weeks in arrears before we're able to make an application to the court. That timescale is going to increase to nearly 4 months. It's going to be 3 months and 28 days, which is the best part of 4 months. That's 4 months rent arrears before a landlord can take action. As you say, Sophie, that's going to have an effect on the tenant, it's going to have an effect on the landlord, and it's going to have an effect on the courts.
So something else that was mentioned in the original renters reform bills, I get them mixed up with the renters reforms, the renters' rights. The original renters reforms was getting rid of the fixed term tenancy. Is that still in, or is that gone now?
Oh yes.
I'll let Sophie have this one.
Off you go, Sophie.
I don't know anyone, no tenant, no landlord alike, that is happy about the removal of fixed term. I mean, considering the previous talks before the bill, the original bill got released, was that they wanted 3-year minimum fixed terms. To completely go the other way is insane. But if you look at the detail again, it's saying balance, but it's not balanced, because the tenants can give notice immediately, but landlords cannot give notice for the first 12 months. So the tenant, in essence, has a 12-month fixed term, but a landlord does not. So again, it's just about balance. And I mean, I could go into the student market, which obviously is something that we work in down here, and it's going to have interesting impacts on it that we're yet to kind of see the full reasonings of. If a group of tenants can leave their tenancy halfway through the academic cycle, and the landlord can't re-let that property in that academic cycle, because we have something called Article 4, which means that if a landlord rents their property back to a family, they lose their planning permission for it to be a HMO. So it's going to be interesting. We're still working our way through that because we're advertising our students, will be next month, and they're looking at bringing in this act with immediate effect by October 2025. So we're renting property that's going to be impacted by the changes next year. So we're going to have to use our crystal ball to try and see how we have to change our tenancies and our terms to deal with that. So that's currently what we're fixing.
Student lets aren't 12 months anyway, are they? I thought they're only partial year. Or
we do 12 months in our. It's becoming more common to do 12 months. There's generally a 5-month gap between tenancies, but more and more common is that student tenancies are 12 months.
So it's not affected by that, but it's the challenge is if they leave early and don't pay, then you're left with, well, I guess landlords will have to be very prolific at chasing arrears of tenants and guarantors then, won't they? For the
well, in fairness, this is where agents come in. I think that one thing that's coming out of this bill, which is more and more apparent, is that agents are more important than ever, and that it's so complex, and the admin and everything involved in it is so complex that landlords really shouldn't be going alone on it.
Well, this brings me to my next question. I mean, what do we need to do, Sophie, as letting agents to start to prepare our customers and our businesses for this?
I think we need to, not that anyone's putting their head in the sand because everyone is aware of it, but I think people aren't realising how quickly this is going to come on us. We talked with Conservatives that we had 12 steps and that it was going to take time, but Labour are pushing this through at breakneck speed, and they are looking to get this in ASAP, and they're hell-bent on doing so. They've got a large majority. There's not a lot stopping it going through in its current form, although it's through debate at the moment. So I think agents need to be looking at their processes because, like Dawn says, this is a lot of changes in one go. This isn't just one little thing like tenant fee ban. I know it's not a little thing, but it was just one section of our day. And this is now every sector of our day as letting agents, of everything we do is affected by this bill. All our processes have to be looked at. Our terms of business need to looked at, what we charge for, how we charge for it. Our tenancy agreements have to change. Section 13 will undoubtedly obviously have to change once we get the wording for it. There is not a part of a letting business that isn't going to be affected by it. So we have to start looking at it now, because as we know, if we change anything, it's a really big job to do. It's not a sit down 5 minutes, done and dusted. This is an actual overview of our whole business, our processes and how our teams work. So we've already started that process.
Sounds a little bit like when they bought the smoke alarms one out and we had like till midnight to do it.
yeah, exactly. Like no one should sit on their heels because these are going to drop part of their fees with renewals disappearing, because renewals will no longer be a thing with fixed term tenancies. So for a lot of agents, that's a chunk of fee that's going to go missing, like with the tenant fee ban. So I think agencies now need to be looking at how they're structured, what they need to change, how they need to change their systems and processes, and CRMs need to be on as well to find out how they're changed, how they're ready to adapt to the changes, because it is going to change. It is going to change everything.
So how much notice, does either of you know how much notice you think we're going to get? I mean, is there going to be a preparation phase where, we get, this is going to be how this, or is it just going to be like, bang, midnight, off you go?
Sally, did you watch the budget?
I did.
They gave it to me.
Both sat there watching, was like, oh my God, like midnight tonight, capital gains tax change, bang, gone. It's crazy.
I mean, currently there's no timescales, but they have stated on several occasions that they want it to go all live on one date. And that's previous tenancies. It's not like phased, like tenant fee ban, where your old tenancies stayed on the old system for a while and then went on the new. So it's looking like it'll be bang. So we're currently looking at October 2025, but there was a terrible article I read this morning that's saying they were going to try and push it through before summer. Because usually legislation comes in April or October. They're generally the two kind of windows of dates. So yeah, people need to be thinking about this really seriously now.
I think if I can just add to that, Sally, I completely agree with everything that you've said. I think we need to not rest on our laurels, because we can become complacent. Let's be truthful. We've been talking about renters reform bill for 5 years. So everybody just kind of thinks, yeah, we've been doing this for 5 years. It's never coming. It's coming this time, and it is on its way. It will be with us, if not next year, but I agree with Sophie, it's probably going to be October, most definitely by the year after. I would be surprised if it goes into 2026. I'm anticipating October. So we can't rest on our laurels. As letting agents, we need to prepare and do all of the things that Sophie has just said. But we are going to have to do the most immense amount of training with our staff and our teams. And the bigger your teams are, the more implementation and training you're going to have to do. We are literally basically going to be teaching them then the whole job again. Because as Sophie said, right from front end staff through to back end staff, processes are going to be needed to be changed. I'll just give you a little example of a front end process that's going to need to be changed in light of the Renters' Rights Bill. Landlords need to be registered with the Property Ombudsman, or the Private Rented Sector Ombudsman is what they're calling them. They also need to be registered on the new database that will be introduced. Now, letting agents have a legal obligation to ensure that a landlord is registered with the Property Ombudsman or the Private Rented Sector Ombudsman and is registered on the database. And if we market a property that is not, the landlord does not meet that criteria, we as agents are liable for a potential fine up to £7,000. So it's not just back end that we need to focus on, it's front end as well. And in particular, as you said there, Sophie, periodic tenancies are going to be very relevant to our front end staff that are dealing with tenants and negotiating terms, because that's going to be gone by now. So we need to have a robust training plan. You need to be talking to all of your team about this now. Just this morning in our monthly management meeting that I hold once a month with my tenancy management department, we had a full coaching session on renters' rights. And it's about teaching them that it may change. This may not be the actual intricacies by the time we get to the end, but it isn't going to change that much. So their minds are already starting to be trained to understand that actually the way that we've done our job, I'll use Amy as an example here. She's been with us 14 years. She's always done her job in one way. The tenant fee ban, as you said, Sophie, it was a big thing for us as business owners because we lost a chunk of income, but it was quite easy. Don't charge tenant fees. You can't get that wrong.
Some still do, Dawn. Come on now.
But this now, you have to think about so many different moving parts. And one of the things I'd like to come back to, and it may be not right now, is the Section 13 that you mentioned earlier, because I actually do have some concerns surrounding that because of the way that it reads at the moment.
Go on, elaborate. What do you mean?
Okay, so we're all used to using.
Just bear in mind, we don't want to be live at 7 o'clock, so I'm just checking.
We're all used to using Section 13s, and it's a way that we increase rent by notification, by formal notification rather than negotiation, which the only changes really to the Section 13 process is that we're now going to have to give 2 months notice, not the end of the world. And it can only be done every year. Well, that's fine because we can only do it every year now anyway. But my big concern, and this is because I think in the minds of clever people, is that what they're now saying is that the tenant has the right to appeal, which they have now. But when a tenant appeals, currently, if the tenant is unsuccessful in their appeal, the rent increase will be backdated to the date that the rent increase was supposed to start. So if unsuccessful in their appeal, the landlord will get backdated rent and they will have to pay that, or they're deemed in arrears. Under the proposed new legislation, the rent increase will, if successful, will not come into effect until the date of the tribunal determination. Now, what that tells me is that, and I asked my tenancy management team today, I said, I know we've had a few go to tribunal, and I said, how long is the rough time scale? Depending on area, anything between 8 to 12 months. So that, for me, tenants don't want to pay the increased rent. They'll take it to tribunal just for the fun of it. It will delay the rent increase by whatever the time scale is that it takes for the tribunal to give a decision. And the landlord, therefore, is losing out on rent during that period. So I think it will increase appeals unless they put some strict measures in place. But the other thing that the tribunal will have the rights to do is to agree the rent increase, but defer it by another further 2 months if the tenant is able to provide evidence of financial hardship.
So who pays the tribunal costs? Does the tenant pay that, or who covers that?
It's free.
It's
free.
Oh, man, that's like a get out of
And
jail.
they've also got 2 months to raise it now. At the moment, they've only got one, so a lot of people don't bother because it's not a lot of time. But they've now got 2 months and it's free, which I know it is now, but they'll publicise it. It's free. So I think it, like Dawn says, I do think it's going to bring up a lot more people using that service.
Because it's a way to delay the rent increase, isn't it? I think if I was in government, I'd say, listen, if you're able to, I think what we need to do as agents, let's talk about what we can do to improve that. Make the tenant understand the reason for the rent increase, provide some comparable evidence to them so that you can show them how you've got to that figure, so that you're evidencing to them that this is the current market value or this is still below the current market value. Put a little bit more time and effort into the explanation as to where you've got that rent increase from, so that actually the tenant doesn't feel, the tenant can see, actually this does look fair to me in terms of a market rent. So maybe as agents, we can just provide a little bit more of a reasoning, evidence of our reasoning of why we've determined that as market value.
Yeah, you could just see that's going to be a delaying tactic, isn't it? Like they're just not pay the extra. It's going to be really, really interesting. So, I mean, Sophie, Dawn was talking about training her staff there. I mean, have you started the process of training your staff on this already?
Yeah, we have. We've actually got a full training session in on Tuesday before I come to see you guys in lovely London. Yeah, we've started this early, the conversations, mostly also because they need to know, because landlords are calling now asking the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not because we're putting it into practice, it's because they need to know the answers, because they can't pass every call to me or Rhiannon or Charlotte. They need to know the answers to what's coming. And because we're currently dealing with our student landlords, which we're having to have this conversation in more depth with them now, because we've had to look at changing our terms this early for it, the staff need to know what's coming and how we're going to handle it. And so, yeah, absolutely, we have to. And that's, like Dawn said, it's a whole team that you're having to, it's front and back, and it does affect every aspect of the business. It's not, it's a lot of training and time and money and effort to put into it. And obviously with the budget, and businesses have now got, rising costs all over the place, like it is a lot more burden on a business to get everybody trained.
Well, no, I am a landlord, and I am also a multiple business owner. So with the Renters' Rights Bill and the budget this week, I'm just going to go and run away to a little island somewhere. What are we saying to pacify our clients, Sophie or Dawn? What are we saying to how do we put their minds at rest? Because we've been through all these things. Scotland's been through their renters' rights. We've had the Welsh changes over there. It's our turn now. But what are we saying to people to
look? We move. We've been through big changes before. We move. We're a very adaptable sector. We'll sit here and talk about it, but we will find ways through it. But it will be agents that find the ways through it, not the landlords. So I think landlords need to trust agents. This is what we live and breathe every single day. It's our job. It's what we're looking at. We're prepping for this now. I had one landlord say to me today, I don't want to think about that till next year. I was like, well, you don't really have a choice. And trust agents to lead you through it, because we will find a way. Property is still one of the best investments. Even with everything going on, it is still one of the best investments, and if it's done right and properly, it can still work. We can learn from Scotland and Wales, who have also gone through big changes. Rental property is always going to be needed. The plus side is that rents are probably going to increase. So we're going to have more demand and rents are going to increase. So, the landlords that cling in there and find the way through will be okay. It's just they have to trust that will get them through it.
Now, I know educating landlords is a big thing, and this is something I've been involved in since 1997, which makes me feel really old. We've done landlord seminars, and nowadays it's more webinars. And my understanding is a lot of landlords, they're busy people, they're working. I'm a landlord, I'm working, and someone says, oh, your boiler's broke. It's like, I haven't got time to deal with this now. But there's a lot of landlords that perhaps are seeing the headlines and not seeing the detail beneath. So I know, Dawn, you absolutely focus on educating landlords, and every 12 weeks you're doing a webinar. Talk to me about what when you're doing these webinars, what is the response from the landlords? Do they understand all this? Do they get it? And what's the value in educating them? Why spend 2 hours of your life every 12 weeks doing a free webinar for landlords? What's the value in that?
Well, it's important. I'm really proud to work in this sector. I love this industry. And as you know, I, for some strange reason, might change my mind when this one comes out, but I love legislation. And I deem it, like Sophie said, as it's our job. This is the job that I've decided to do. This is the job I've been doing for 20 years. And I only want to make our sector better. So by educating landlords is the only way that we're going to do that. Because let's be honest, the reason that we're in this need for reform in our industry is because, unfortunately, there are rogue landlords and rogue agents out there still operating, making it look bad for the others that are not. So I think, Sally, you would not believe some of the questions I get from these landlords, and one resonates with me majorly. This was a webinar that I did in 2024, just to put it out there. They asked me when the rules, like I need to register a deposit, when did that come into force? And I politely stated that it was the 6th of April, 2007.
Just recently then.
Just recently. So I think it's really important that but also what it does from a letting agent point of view to landlords is it pacifies them in terms of this is our job. As Sophie's just said, put trust in us. We can take away the actual day-to-day need of you knowing everything that you need to know, to just understanding that we know what we need to know. And if we are looking after your property, I can assure you that your property is safe, and that means you are safe. It's really important, because I do not believe that landlords understand what letting agents do when they are correctly and compliantly and effectively managing a tenancy.
Well, if we don't tell them, they're not going to know, are they?
And that's exactly it. If you don't tell them, they're not going to know. And that's why we do our educational webinars for landlords. And the feedback is phenomenal. But now more than ever, I think you're right, Sophie, because we've got some landlords out there that can be self-managing landlords and do an all right job. Because the legislation that we're talking about has been around. The most recent revision was 1997. And although we've had bits of legislation come in thereafter, I mean, you don't really need a law degree to understand I now need an electric cert or I need a smoke alarm. The proof is in the pudding. But actually now, to learn the whole of what we're talking about in changes, they're going to have to make this their full-time job. And just before we move on from that, there's one thing that we haven't talked about that the renters' rights is also bringing changes to, and will be a very valuable tool for tenants that are trying to line their pockets from landlords. Is the rent repayment orders. Rent repayment orders are a thing already, and a tenant or a local authority can apply for up to 12 months rent back if a landlord is found guilty of one of the items on the list. Now, the most common one is managing a licensable property without a license. That's the most common at the moment, but there's a bigger list than that. The new legislation changes, and I think it's the database registration. I'm going to go back to that. Something as small as a landlord not registering to be on the database, the tenant can make an application for a rent repayment order.
Wow.
Now, wait. The current amount that you can apply for is up to 12 months. Double that, because it's now 24. And also, the time that a tenant has to make an application after the offence is currently 12 months. Double that. So they now have 2 years after the offence has occurred, and they will have up to 2 years rent can be returned to them.
This is a long way because if you one of the big complaints from the industry and the people that regulate us in so far over the last 10, 20 years has been that the fines and the prosecutions are too small. You know, if you looked at like what fines that landlords were for really bad situations, you know, damp, falling down, disrepair, people living in squalor, overcrowding, all those sort of things. And the fine was £3,000 because it was means tested. Now, of course, they've scrapped the means testing and all that sort of stuff. We're starting to see some big fines. I saw one the other day that was like £130,000 for another. That's the biggest fine I've ever seen. But what you're saying there is the fines now are going to become on a standard much higher. Because if it's 12 months or 2 years rent repayment order, that is big numbers, isn't it? We're starting to get on top of all the other fines that we've got, prosecutions, banning orders. It's scary stuff, and it makes you realise how inconsequential a tenancy management fee is that a letting agent might charge in comparison to the risks. Because if your risk was a £3,000 fine, £3,000 a year in management fees, I'll take my chances. But if the fine here is £30,000 and a banning order versus £3,000 lettings fee, I'll go with the lettings fees. It really does start to tilt the balance. What's your thoughts on that, Sophie?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think landlords need to know what the consequences are of not following these things out, because they know it's law and to them it's a dibble dabble. Some of them still think, oh, I'll get a couple grand fine or whatever it is. But now, I mean, even the recent changes of 30 grand fines seem quite significant to me. But if you're looking at 2 years repayment order, I mean, average rents across the country now are rising. So you're looking at £1,000 a month, £1,200 a month, depending on where you are. That's really significant. And, you know, paying for a professional to do it. I mean, we use the example all the time that you wouldn't get someone to do your conveyancing, or you wouldn't do it yourself, or you wouldn't go to, I just think it's getting so important now that the consequences are so big that it is an absolute no-brainer to use a professional to handle it.
And I think there as well, Sophie, what you're saying is, so we've got to remember that if it was a full rent repayment order of 2 years, we're talking 24,000. We talked earlier about lack of enforcement and lack of policing by the councils. The tenant is going to financially benefit. So it's not, oh, the landlord might get found out. The tenant is going to be able to create that claim and benefit from the money. On top of that, we need to bear in mind that if the landlord is found guilty that he needs to pay out on a rent repayment order, that doesn't include the amount of the fine that they will levy to him for failure to comply, because they have a new number. Have you noticed, Soph, that the new number is £7,000?
They do like 7,000. It was 5 because it used to be 5 grand per cert, and now they've upped it to 7.
Everything's 7,000, and then it escalates to 40,000 for repeated offenders. But when it gets to repeated offenders, it also becomes a criminal matter in certain cases. So this is not, oh, it's all right, I might get a little fine from the council. There's benefits to the tenants. They're going to financially benefit. And apparently there is more funding being put into enforcement of the legislation. I will welcome that, because I think we do need to out the ones that are being found guilty of doing these things. It's going to be interesting.
I was talking to a man who runs a shop who is a landlord a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying to me, he says, well, I don't care about all this legislation stuff. He said, if I want to get the tenants out, I'll get my mates round and they sort it out. And I said, you can't do that. I don't care. They ain't coming for me. I've been doing it for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. I just thought, oh my God.
Well, he currently could be slapped with a rent repayment order, because unlawful eviction is one of the reasons that they can claim right now and here and then.
That's why we're here, isn't it? Because
it's why we're here.
But I always try and look for opportunities and everything. And what I'm hearing from both of you is that landlords need us now more than ever. And I, of course, I'm going to say that, but I am a landlord as well, you know. But with my 34 years in the industry, full ARLA qualifications, I was a legal trainer in my little group of companies here for years. I would not now want to have a full-time job and be managing property on the side. I would not want to be doing that, because it is so complex. And I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying, Sophie. If we were to embrace, as letting agents, educating landlords and helping them understand or whatever, the reality is they'll realize this isn't a job for you to do yourself. You need to find an expert to do it. It's really complex. And I think we've got to be banging that drum, haven't we? Educating landlords in whatever way you see fit, whether it's webinars, seminars. We had Harriet in our group, didn't we? She did a seminar and had 120 people or something, and a landlord with 26 properties. She said, "Here, have them. I'm not doing this anymore." You know, and that's what we need to be doing. We need to helping landlords to understand and to see the challenges. I wouldn't want to deal with it. It's just terrifying. And I know the laws, most of them, not all of them, but most of them. It's crazy. Final word, Sophie. Advice
Yeah,
out there for letting agents right now. What are the key things to think about to do? Worry, not worry. What do we need to do?
I think everyone needs to get on, start having these conversations within their offices and looking at their processes, looking at their terms, looking at their tenancies. I also think agents need to stop underselling us as an agency with their fees, because with this sort of responsibility on our shoulders that we currently have, I thought that some agents were completely doing us all a disservice by doing cheap fees. But I think as we come into the new era of lettings, it's even more important to make sure that you are, balancing your risk with what you're charging for what you do. And yeah, just get prepped. I think it's really start time looking at your processes, and you need to do it now. Don't wait till closer to the time, because it'll be a big job and you will get yourself in a pickle.
Terrifying. Dawn?
Completely agree with Sophie, and one of the resonating factors there that you just said to me, Sally, is Sophie, is, come on, letting agents, we are going to have to take on the biggest change that we have known. I have not worked through 1997 or 1989 changes. This is going to be the biggest thing. We've got so much work to do that we need to value the amount that we charge, and we need to value the worth that we give to our landlords, and we need to be charging what we need to be charging to do a good job, because this is a whole new world for all of us. From a landlord's point of view, what I would say to them is, let us prepare for you. Let us go through this process. One of the things that I think landlords should perhaps consider now, if they don't already have it, is a rent guarantee policy, because of the way that rents are changing and the length of time they may be without rent. That's a tip I would give to the landlord right now, is look at protecting your rent in readiness for this coming in, because we don't know what the new world of rent guarantee looks like, because as an insurer, their risks may increase because of the length of time it takes to evict, and therefore policies could increase. So as agents, yes, prepare, train. It's never too early. We know what it's going to look like. It may get a few tweaks. I'm hoping for you, Sophie, down in student world, it does. But just train, and educate your landlords. We need to pacify the landlords that this will be okay. It's just the new normal.
Amazing. Now, this time next week, it is Friday, but Thursday next week, we've got a little event going called Agent Rainmaker Live, and we are spending the whole morning of the Thursday talking about the Renters' Rights Bill. We've pulled together some of the top experts in the country. We have David Cox going to be doing a whole session on the Renters' Rights Bill. We have Ian McKenzie's going to be on stage. We have Neil Cobbold. We have yourself, Dawn, and Sophie. And the entire industry is going to be there. And we're going to be talking about Renters' Rights Bill, how you as letting agents can prepare, make ready for the changes. So if you fancy a whole morning swatting up on Renters' Rights Bill, on what to do, what not to do, what changes to make, everything else, then Agent Rainmaker Live is really the place for you to be at. So go and grab yourself a ticket and get 2 for 1 at the moment. We already have about 300 letting agents in attendance. We've got all the exhibitors and sponsors and everything else going to be at the event as well. So it's going to be a great few days. So anyway, I just want to say thank you so much, Sophie and Dawn, for joining me here today and talking about the Renters' Rights Bill. It's been fascinating. It really has. And I think at the end of it, there are opportunities. There are things that we can do. And the answer is not to worry about it, not to get fearful, but just start preparing.
Exactly. Yeah, agree.
Right. Thank you all for watching, guys. And those of you watching on replay, if you want to reach out to us, please do just drop us a message. We'll see it. You want to email myself, it's Sally at Agent Rainmaker, or Dawn at Agent Rainmaker. Sophie Lang will be tagged in the posts. And we'll see you all hopefully at Agent Rainmaker Live next year. But if not, go and start preparing. Thank you. See you soon.